Welcome, one and all, to the world's finest show. I'm Kyle Hudson.
And I'm Ray Gordon.
And I know last week we said we were going to talk about Metal Gear Solid, and we actually had an interview already that we did with Rich Molika. But earlier today, we had very sad news. We heard that, unfortunately, Representative John Lewis has passed. Now, earlier this year when we rebooted the show, we kind of said we were going to stay away from in memoriams, but I felt this one was very important and something we needed to acknowledge. And a lot of people aren't aware that John Lewis, in addition to being a civil rights leader, a representative in Congress, was also an award-winning comic book writer. He wrote a trilogy of comic books called March, and actually he wrote a sequel called Run, which was supposed to get published last year, but still hasn't been, and so I'm sure that will be coming out soon.
Yeah, how they do it.
So, before we get into the discussion, I did write something up just in case you don't know about Representative John Lewis. Here's a little bit of his history. When he was just a child, he saw Rosa Parks on TV with the bus boycotts. He eventually met her at 17, and he met Martin Luther King Jr. at 18. He was then elected to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee when he was a junior in college.
SNCC.
What was that?
The SNCC.
Yes. And I'm sure he got a Medal of Freedom for his work as a freedom writer. But a lot of people forget when he did that, he was only 21 years old. He was 37 years old when he ran for Congress the first time and lost. So he went to work for Jimmy Carter. And then at 41, won his first election to Atlanta City Council. 5 years later, he ran for his current job and won, but it wasn't easy. Local leaders wanted another man, State Representative Julian Bond, and pushed him really hard. But the people of Georgia believed in John Lewis and elevated him to the position that he held until his death. So, Ray, the amount of things this man has done is uncanny, and the level of impact that he's had on our country is literally almost unparalleled. What do you think will be John Lewis's greatest legacy?
I believe that him being a towering figure of the civil rights movement will be in bold in his legacy. Just what he stood for, what he fought for, what he fought to create is what's going to be most remembered about him. It won't be his congressional time, probably. It won't be his comic book, even though that's interesting. I wish more people would find out about it, but it's going to be that period of time in the 60s and 70s, that civil rights movement era that never really stopped, but just sort of needs a new definition now. And I feel like now that, unfortunately, with his passing, people are going to use this opportunity to re-educate themselves on the civil rights movement itself. I feel like similarly to how when HBO came out with The Watchmen and then people researched Tulsa, Oklahoma, this unfortunate passing will enlighten many Americans and people abroad.
Yeah, I think that it's unfortunate. We so often, like you said, it always takes until someone passes for us to really appreciate the work they've done. It shouldn't be how it is. People should be able to, and I do believe John Lewis at least got to, Representative John Lewis got to, he got to at least see the fruits of his labor born, if not completely. At least he got to see the needle move, right? I think so many people in the struggle, they work so hard, and it isn't until after that their work is recognized, like Bayard Rustin, right? So, I don't know, like with everything that's going on, right? It's kind of like his passing has hit me a lot harder. Like I said, we were supposed to do something completely different, but I felt this is super important to talk about. When you heard about his passing, how did you feel?
Oh, when I heard about it, I was at my essential job, trying to be essential and working very hard. And it just sort of passed by on the news feed, and I froze. So I was like, John Lewis? That's a civil rights figure, John Lewis. And I lost it. I mean, it was, I scoured the internet, tried to find out if this was real, tried to find, because we live in the information age now. So I didn't immediately believe it when I first saw it. I had to do some, background research, find out the source material, all that stuff, anti-plagiarism and whatnot. But when it hit me that we lost something. This world lost a light, and it's apparent. I don't know how to express it. I don't know how to express the feeling of loss in word form. It's more like you feel a little bit closer to gravity.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think one of the things we've talked about it on our show, that the work that he did, was necessary work that had to be done, but it was kind of a situation that if he didn't do it, who else would, right? And I just, when I was doing the research and I found out how young he was apparently the youngest person to speak at the March on Washington, and I really feel people forget that. You know what I mean? Like, people forget that when Martin Luther King led the March on Washington, he was 35, a year older than me, right? These people were young people shaking up their community because they saw that it needed to be changed. And I honestly think that we haven't seen any kind of activism like that since then until now. And I wouldn't even see now we're even close to the level of commitment that those folks were at. Would you agree?
No, I feel like that the situation has evolved, so the approach needs to evolve. I feel like now that we're in the information age, now that we're in this time where the truth is mercurial, being an activist and having to explain yourself are issues that our generation is learning how to deal with now. We read the stories on the marches. We read the stories on protests. We read about them in history. They were taught to us, but there's no teacher like experience. And experiencing it, having to be on the front lines, having to choose how to protest and how to make a stand in relation to your life. It's a humbling feeling to know that the fight towards equality is an every year thing.
Oh, and it feels, I mean, have you ever heard of the story of Sisyphus? He keeps on pushing the boulder up the hill and it rolls down. Fighting for social justice is exactly like pushing a boulder up a hill, right? If you give up, if you just relax for like a second, you start slipping. And if you give up too much, it crushes you, right? It will crush you. And so it's the thing that's so hard about, not just the civil rights movement, all kinds of justice work is that it's constant, because the opposing forces are never going to stop. And I think John Lewis's life, he literally started when he was a teenager and did it his whole life. And I think that's an example a lot of people need to learn from, because this isn't something you do and it's done and then you move on to the next thing. It's a commitment. And I say it to everyone that, as I'm out there doing work, now doing activism, it's like, and everyone needs to take a break from time to time, right? Like, you can't be on all the time, but if you're in for the whole game.
Right.
If you want to be a player, you got to play the whole game. You can't sit out, a whole inning. You can take a breather, you can get a water break, but you got to keep playing, because, players like John Lewis don't come around. They come around once in a generation, And
we have to also look at the understanding that is like America is mourning the passing of a black man. Recently, black men have been passing, and it has elicited a response from the American people. This is another black body. It wasn't taken from distress It wasn't taken from manipulation. It's
Well,
just
not for lack of trying. Not for
not
lack
for
of
lack
trying.
of trying, mind you.
And
But
yeah,
he passed, and America grieves again. It goes to show you that just how much care people actually have about their fellow countrymen. When someone died, I've never met John Lewis. I felt a loss when I read that headline. I never met him. I felt like I missed out on an opportunity, and for no other reason other than the fact that I just wasn't born early enough. It's a loss to the community. It's a loss to America, and I hope that people learn from his life and not just get caught up in what they can pull out negatively from his life, and how and who he's grown up and who he's fought with throughout the years. It's hard to keep fighting and explain yourself when people start to change, and people change.
and one of the things we talk about a lot on this show is heroes, right? And normally we're talking about Batman, Spider-Man, and I think sometimes we do forget, I will admit, that in real life, you know, it's not always, victory isn't always guaranteed, right? That there's no promise that you will win. You know what I mean? Like in comic books and in movies and stuff, right? You always know the good guys are going to win.
There's an inherent understanding.
Exactly, unless it's Empire Strikes Back, right? Spoiler alert. But I don't know. We've seen it over and over again that you can lose. Like good guys lose in real life a lot. And I always tell people, if you're one of those people and you care, you got to get in the game, man. It is one of these things where that's part of being an American, and as a white person, I always get upset when I look at the civil rights stuff and how few white people are actually participating, right? It's great to see the folks now, but back then was harder, right? Like it's easy now as a white person to be an ally, but back then was when they really needed us. And it's kind of, it kind of makes me ashamed, right? Like I don't really identify, like I'm not like a big like person who identifies with my ethnicity, but like it's hard to ignore, right? As a white person, when you see these pictures that it's the white people exacting violence on black people. Like that is every image. And you never really see, and I'm sure there were white folks that were helping them out. I'm sure there were. And I'm sure there were people who were doing the work. But there should have been more. You know what I mean? Like, and that's, I guess, the positive takeaway today of everything that's going on is people are starting to realize, because I think, like we said in the episode a couple of weeks back, like people have a perception this is a black people problem, right? That black folks have to figure out this one out. But at least our generation seems to recognize that this is an American problem and that it's going to take all of us. Because what we were last week, we were talking about anti-Semitic remarks, right? And there were more this week. And we're all in this together. Like if they come after the same people who come after black people, the same people who come after Jewish people, right? I've never heard a white supremacist say, I don't like black people, but I've come around on Jews, right? Like that's just not how their brains work. They don't like anything that isn't like them. And so that's what being an ally is. It means that even though when you're not at stake, you're willing to work with someone else who is, because you know that there will come a day. That's a surefire thing. There will come a day when someone comes after you.
And Representative John Lewis actually had to manipulate those streams and operate and maneuver in those streams for 40 plus years or 50 plus years. It boggles the mind how much he had to go through to get to today. And more protesters have gone to jail over Breonna Taylor than the actual murderer of Breonna Taylor. And this is America. This is the fight that John Lewis has been fighting. And with his passing, the torch is now passed. It's a mournful day. It's not a day to be elated. It's more of a day of celebratory remembrance. because that man led a life. That man led a real life, outdoors. when you're at the Million Man March with Martin Luther King, and then that's the beginning. Yeah. I hope I implore people who see this show to take from this that life is outside. I know that they want to keep us in. I understand that we have to stay in for the coronavirus. I understand we have to be safe, but you have to continually be aware of what's going on around you, and not put up and not be not allow transgressions or disparity to actively happen in front of your face. And if we can pull that out of a man's life and spread that around, I'm pretty sure that'd be a great pass it on.
And I think, looking at the glass half full mentality, I don't know how you perceive things, but I've kind of, watching TV, it seems like the George Floyd protests and the calls for racial injustice have been starting to kind of fade into the background as the news cycle moves on, right? As we near the election, you don't see the Black Lives Matter marches every day. Or, I mean, maybe in places like Portland, but around here, I really don't see. And, I'm sure there's still people. I'm sure, they're still out there. But the energy is kind of being shifted elsewhere. And hopefully the stories that people are going to be telling over the next couple of days are going to remind people, like what I was just saying, like, we didn't win. We didn't really, we still have a lot more work to do if we want to get to the mountaintop. You know what I mean? Like we are so far from where we need to be. We're farther than we ever been. I'll say that. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I'm proud of my country. I'm proud of my country in that we have grown, but we still have a lot of work to do. And it's going to be on all of us. Anyone that believes that these changes are necessary, right? Because it's democracy. And I can speak as someone who has run in an election. At the end of the day, it's whoever gets the most votes. And so if you believe in these causes, you got to show up. It's one of the reasons why I'm always talking about voting on this show. Because the people who don't agree with us, they vote.
Very much so.
And it's just, today has been a whirlwind, and I just felt it was very necessary to speak about this amazing man, because I don't know, I just felt like in a week it would probably, we'll be on to some other thing, unfortunately.
Some other tragedy.
Right.
I'm growing concerned with how used to tragedy our generation is. Yeah,
but I do have hope. I mean, remember a couple years ago when we had the young kids, the March for Our Lives kids on the show?
Yes.
Like, it had to be 3 years ago. And I just remember looking at those kids and being, wow. And I remember one of them, his name was Jamie. He actually is now working with me on a political campaign, which is so cool to see that, like, the young people are really, I have faith in the next generation. I mean, our broke, man. You know what I mean? We got hit with like a recession when we graduated, and then like all this stuff right as we start to get, but these young kids, they had like the ones that are right below us, right? That generation right below us. They're kind of in between the chaos, right? And so they'll have a little bit of money and resources and stuff.
Right. I'm happy, actually.
Yeah, and if you look at what's going on, those are the people that are driving a lot of this, I know the Black Lives Matter march I did with Nydia, all of those people were in their 20s. You know what I mean? So don't let anyone tell you you're too young or you don't know, because trust me, they said the same stuff to John Lewis.
Right.
Like when he ran, that's one of the things I thought was interesting. When he ran for his job, the one that he had for 40 years, the people who ran his place, they didn't want him. They wanted some other guy. They thought, he was too edgy. He was too, like he wasn't
divisive.
I don't think he was divisive, but he spoke his truth, right? He wasn't willing to appease people or say things in a different way so that people wouldn't be uncomfortable. He knew that in order to get change done, you have to make people uncomfortable, right? Like that's the only way that they'll do, because if they're comfortable, they're just going to stay how they are.
Comfortability breeds contempt. And honestly, I'm glad that the young generation is not buffaloed by the oppressive regimes that have held us down like this. Like they don't care about a thing. And there's good to that and there's bad to that. But what's great about it is that they will go out there and march in the street. Doesn't matter about jobs, doesn't matter about family members, doesn't matter about relations. They're still out there.
And it's interesting. I had this revelation when I did go to the Black Lives Matter march, right? Like all of these goals, right? And these goals sometimes can seem unachievable, right? Like when you're talking about some of the things we talk about in social justice, they just seem really pie in the sky. But the thing is, everything, the Civil Rights Voting Act, every major piece of legislation in our country all started with a group of people who were like, that's messed up, man. You know, we should do something about it. And so I think the reason why marching is important is because it reminds you that every single journey begins with a single step, right? Like the march is literally the first step in the process, like both figuratively and literally, right? And the thing is, what's the second step, right? So if you're out there marching, if you're out there protesting, if you're out there, you know, posting on social media, the next step is to get involved, right? Find a local organization that you believe in. It doesn't even need to necessarily be political. You know, you can find an issue that you believe in, whether it's homelessness. I mean, we are on the verge of a massive eviction crisis that was going to bring homeless upon our country like we've never seen. If you believe in, heck, if you believe in animal rights, go help an animal rights organization. There's groups of people out there that are doing the work. Plug yourself in and bring your talents. Aside from John Lewis's comic book March, which I definitely, again, suggest that everyone read, what are some other movies or TV shows that people who are, again, there's a lot of people that are just tuning into this stuff, right? What do you think are good shows that they could get started on that, you know, could, you know, give them a little bit more of a holistic view of the situation?
I feel that it would be very informative for people to go back and watch the speeches of Malcolm X. I would encourage people to listen to the civil rights figures of that day, those that John Lewis, Representative John Lewis, may he rest in peace, those whom he fought beside. I would encourage people, not just Martin Luther King, but the Malcolm X's, the Medgar Evers, the Bayard Rustin, and the like. And there's so many more.
And don't just watch the clips. Don't just watch the clips. Watch the whole speech.
The whole speech. You'll learn something. I learned something. I've watched those speeches countless times. I still learn things. Go back and listen to the speeches, listen to the words, and realize why he was fighting. Because sometimes people need a reminder.
Yeah, and it's easy. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, when Barack Obama was elected president, were like, oh, racism's over. I don't have to worry about it anymore. We have a black president. It's all good. But honestly, that was like, again, that was just a step, right? Yeah. That was just a step. And honestly, we won't actually be a country that recognizes its promise of equality until you and me have every single opportunity under the sun and don't have to worry about being followed, or, you know what I mean? Like, and unfortunately, we're not there yet.
We're getting closer.
Yeah,
we're getting closer. It might not happen in our lifetime, but the ball is rolling.
So we got to keep it rolling, right?
Have to. That's literally our obligation.
So, so I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss for words today. I kind of like I said, we kind of scrapped our whole plan for today's show. But I don't know. Recently, I've been feeling very anxious about the future. Um, what have your coping mechanisms been in dealing with all of this stress and all of this, like, one thing after another, it seems? How are you staying sane?
As someone who has been well versed in coping techniques, having been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder when I was 6, um, dealing with stress and dealing with overwhelming emotions is a constant battle. It's kind of like civil rights, but more inwards. To be stressed is to have to live as you're living, but to be uncomfortable with how. And to be uncomfortable with how is where you must begin. Breathing is very important, people. Before I enter any situation, before I enter any problem, I always take a clear, calming, deep breath, not just to my chest, but all the way through my diaphragm. You breathe deep once, twice, 3 times. It's sort of like a control-delete. It resets the period of time that you're in. If you breathe, you can center yourself. And if you center yourself, you can gain more control. There's nothing like sense of awareness. For me, anyway. That's how I've been able to cope with crisis situations. First and foremost is to take a deep breath. Don't be panicked. How about you? Do you have any coping mechanisms to deal with these strenuous times?
I mean, I'll be honest. My daughter is pretty much the biggest help. You know, she's just hanging out with her and
Got an ace in a hole in the window. It's like, yeah, I got my daughter right here.
But I mean, I'll be honest. Like, I mean, for me, you know, all the comic books, video games, all that stuff is, you know, it's all essentially escapism, right? And I'll be honest. When I get upset and depressed and, you know, looking at the world and being like, I go and I read Amazing Spider-Man 801. I know that's like a very specific thing, but it was the last issue of Dan Slott's comic book run on the Amazing Spider-Man, and it's like a standalone story. It takes place early in Spider-Man's career, and he saves this guy at a convenience store, and then you see it's from the guy's perspective, and he goes through his whole life, and at the end of the story, the guy is now old. He has a kid, and they see Spider-Man, and he's like, he saved my life. And he's like, why? Like he's in space. He fights these big things. Like, why would he care about, you know, you? And he's like, well, see, when you save one person, you save a world. Do you know what I mean? You may not save the world, but you save a world. And then it like goes back and you see like all the events in his life that wouldn't have happened if Spider-Man didn't save him, and all the people he touched in that lifetime. And I don't know, that issue always gets me fired up and like recenters me, because it's like, you don't need to save the world. You don't. And I know a lot of people who get angry in this stuff, they go out there and they try and save the world. And, you know, if you try and fix everything, you wind up fixing nothing. But if you can save just one person, if you can help just one person, you actually wind up helping a lot more people, because those people affect other people, and that touches every life, touches countless other lives. So I don't know. That's when I that thing specifically, when I read it, it makes me realize that, you know, if you just help one person, you've done good, right? And you just have to do that every day. You have to go out, put in the work every day, just like, you know, the guys who we read about and the guys we see in movies, because those guys don't really exist. So someone needs to actually be doing that stuff, right? And, you know, like I always say, it's hard to be a good guy, right? Because when you're the good guy, you got to play by the rules. That's the difference between a good guy and a bad guy. But I look out in my country and I see a lot more good people nowadays out there doing work, not sitting on the sidelines, recognizing there's work to be done and doing it. I don't know. I have faith. I think we're gonna be all right, Ray. I mean, I think it's gonna be a long way, but I think we're gonna be all right. You know, if a man like John Lewis can achieve the things that he achieved in his life, despite literally the entire system working against him, that means and that means that you can too, right? That means that I can. That means that, you know,
anyone.
yeah, any regular group of people. What did I say the other day? I was talking to someone. I'm like, oh yeah, changing the country is super easy. All you need is hard work, dedication, and time. You know, that's it.
Well, we got time now.
True, we have tons of time, and that's probably why we're seeing so many people out there. You know what I mean? Because it's kind of hard to fight for your rights when you're working 60 hours a week just to survive.
True. Realizing that.
Yeah, my friend Kevin calls it the stillness. The stillness that COVID has brought upon us. And I really like that term. I really do.
Stillness. Interesting.
Well, because it's given us all time to reflect, right? Like, it's given us all time to take stock in our lives, in our communities. Really, like, because when you're running 1,000,000 miles an hour just to put food on the table, it's very hard to think about a year from now.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or, you know, you think about your kid's future in the abstract, but like, what are you actually doing to improve your children's situation in the world so it's better, right? Like every parent, I speak as a parent, every parent wants the best for their kids, but, you know, there are actions you can take, joining your school board or going to school board meetings, you know what I mean? That like active steps that you can take. I don't know. All right, so real quick before we get to the break, I do want to let you know that we do have a guest today. I called up my friend Reverend Kyle Boyer. He's the head of the Westchester NAACP to talk about Reverend John Lewis. He's another man who is also very active in our community. And so we'll be back with an interview with Reverend Kyle Boyer right after this.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Villaverde.
And I'm Zach Ging. Growing up, we had a difficult time understanding the issues that impacted us as Asian Americans. We had the questions, but didn't know where to find the answers.
So together, we created a podcast and embarked on a journey. Tune into our podcast, The Situation Room, a show that dives deeper into Asian America through hard-hitting topics, cultural cuisine, and shares our own stories.
You can find us on keystonedigital.tv and get access to all of our content and more. Or find us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast.
Welcome back to the World's Finest Show. We are going to be continuing our discussion about the late Representative John Lewis with someone who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. You know, we speak at a lot of the same events. He recently ran for Pennsylvania State House in the 156th District. I would like to introduce you, Reverend Kyle Boyer, the current president of the Westchester NAACP. How are you, Kyle?
I'm all right, Kyle. How are you doing? It's always
Good.
fun.
I know, right? It's like the other Kyle, right?
Yeah.
Now, you are politically active like I am. You work very closely. You do a lot of work in civil rights and helping people in general. It's one of the things I really admire about you.
Try.
And unfortunately, earlier today, we lost Representative John Lewis, who was a amazing figure and changed our country. And so I want to invite you on just to ask, what did Representative Lewis mean to you as someone who is continuing the work?
Man, that question could not possibly be answered in, a 10-minute session, an hour session. But I will say, when you look at the pantheon is the word I've been using, the pantheon of civil rights leaders, prophetic voices in America, particularly Black prophetic voices. John Lewis is right there. The people who not only spoke out, because there's a lot of us, right? Every preacher, pretty much, every Black preacher speaks out about something. But the people who speak out and then there is congruence between what they have said and what they do, that is much more rare. You look, the Dr. Kings are up there and the Abernathys and there's others, but John Lewis definitely is one. And then talking about one who's trying to attempt to continue some of the work that John Lewis is doing, well, we're losing those connections to the civil rights movement. So C.T. Vivian was another contemporary of John Lewis, another Medal of Freedom, I believe, if I got that medal correct, recipient. Mm-hmm. He passed away in the same day yesterday. So folks who have just represented the prophetic work of the Black church over history, folks who stood on the forefront of civil rights in the late 50s and 60s, we're losing them. We've got Andrew Young left, Jesse Jackson left, but we're losing a whole generation of people who were there and who did the work. And that I don't think I've fully processed.
I mean, one of the things I think gets lost when we talk about those folks is how young they were when they started their work. Because, we as, I'm 34, I know you're younger than me, we have only known them as old men and old women. So it's very hard to think that like John Lewis was 21 when he was a freedom rider. That's younger than both of us. He was just able to drink, and instead of going to bars, he was fighting for social justice. And I really think that gets lost. And why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that it's so hard for young people today to connect to that kind of story?
You mentioned it, right? We know people as they have been for us. So I have friends with younger siblings. Their younger siblings are now contemporaries, they're adults, but they will always be like the little brother to me or the younger kid. It's hard to fathom that they could be married with a child now. You're right, I'm only a couple years younger than you. I'm 32, I know you're 34. And John Lewis, working with SNCC, was early 20s, late teens, 23, youngest speaker at the March on Washington, as one of our area's local figures, Bayard Rustin, stood behind him.
And they didn't want him to speak, right? They did not want him to speak, right? They did not want
Right, and there was some challenge because John and the others with him, the Marion Berrys and Stokely Carmichaels, those folks had to be reined in a little bit because there was a generational tension back then as there is now. Generations are always going to have tension because we don't have full perspective. So why aren't things moving fast enough? And how could you possibly be stuck in that way? But we have to understand there's context for why things are the way they are. So the A. Philip Randolphs were not necessarily in a marriage with the John Lewises, but some of the senior leaders, Dr. King and others, had to pull John Lewis aside and say, look, you are ambitious and zealot, but you've got to respect where we have been before. And that happened, and John Lewis kind of reined it in a little bit. So even when you look back at his remarks on the March on Washington, they were a little bit tempered than they would have otherwise been had the immediate older generation, not the A. Philip Randolphs, but the one right above him, and not pulled him aside and said, hey, dude, slow down just a little bit.
Now, one of probably his most famous actions was marching across the bridge. What was the name of the bridge? What was it? And that was called Bloody Sunday. Can you explain to folks what happened and why it was so significant?
Yeah, they got dogs sicked on them, water hoses. It was nuts. And that will always, to me, exemplify what is missing now. Not so much of late, because, right, we've had people be tear gassed and everything, but in between, the 60s and getting to the 90s and early 2000s, right, there was a lot of talk, not so many people willing to actually sacrifice and actually spill blood. And I think that is a big difference between some of the older generations. Now, even when it didn't come to blood, like the blood that was actually shed on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, there were people who were willing to march and boycott in a way that we're not today. Just the willingness to sacrifice is not the same. We are woke, much more woke as a society in many respects, but just not as willing to sacrifice.
I mean, and not to, belittle the term, but I've never really liked the term woke, right? Because that's never really been enough for me, right? Like woke means that,
Yeah.
like, okay, you're aware of the situation, but I almost feel like if you're aware of the situation and you're not doing anything, it's almost worse, right? Because if you're ignorant to it, at least we need to educate those folks, right? But if you know and you still participate in it or just say nothing, right? Like that is something that is very hard for me to grasp as someone who is active. I just don't understand those folks. What do you think is the lesson that John Lewis, if you could distill what his message was, when he said on March in Washington, what do you think he was trying to get at? If he had one message that he was trying to push, what do you think that was?
Action, I think. Now I have to go back and listen to the whole thing because I've only heard snippets in the last couple of days. So I'm not going to pretend to know verbatim all of the remarks or have them memorized. But of what I did hear, there was a lot of mentioning of legislative action, particularly around voting rights. I know that for the entirety of his adult life, John Lewis was a trumpet for voting rights, and even in the last couple of years of his life was really sounding the alarm that voting rights were still under threat. So if
I mean, it was
nothing else
gutted
for me,
while he was in. I'm
dude,
sorry, bro.
it's absurd. No, you're right. It's absurd because they are still under attack, and the fact that people don't see that. We're so woke on so many things, but some of the stuff that matters most, we're not woke on. We're very much asleep. And I think that's why John Lewis spoke with the passion that he spoke with, because he recognized some of the challenge. He was at the table. He was literally a legislator, but he was one who understood sacrifice, understood what it meant to not have, and understood what it meant for what you have to be under threat.
So, obviously, have you read March, his comic book?
I haven't. I've seen it, and I remember it was kind of a big deal when he put it out. I haven't had a chance to read through it.
Because earlier in the show, that was kind of why I felt the connection to our world, and why I felt like it was really proper to bring him up today. I mean, I would like to honor him anyway, but he understood that comic books, that he understood that you needed to meet people where they are.
Where they are, yeah.
Like if it's like you can tell a really long 100-page book, but who's that going to really reach? But if you make it the message in something simple that you can give to a kid, and I mean, I would definitely say it's not children's literature, but I think all kids should read it. I really think that was like when you talked about how we're losing those folks, and I also feel like we're losing knowledge, and I think one of the things they really understood, John Lewis, Martin Luther King, was crafting and framing a narrative, and understanding that how you tell the story is just as important as the story you're trying to tell. Because if no one listens to what you're saying, it doesn't matter. And so, to other young activists out there, people engaged in the community like yourself, what advice would you give to them? Tools that they could find to get involved themselves?
Ooh, that's a good question. Know your history, for sure, would have to be one. And also be willing to sacrifice. Be willing to lose some things, lose elections. And I did not lose my election because I speak out on issues. So I'm not talking about myself. But be willing to lose things, whether that be an election, whether that be followers on social media, whether that be, at worst, even, you got to assess what you're willing to lose and willing to sacrifice. I think losing is different than sacrificing. If you look at it as lost, it's without purpose maybe, or without intention. But when you look at it as sacrifice, if I lost a couple of those followers, I did it for the sake of putting truth in the atmosphere and speaking truth to power. John Lewis did that He marched on the front lines, and he was consistent and truthful and honest. So, right, if you're gonna pick three, the whole preacher thing, pick three, know your history, be willing to sacrifice, and be honest, be true. Same message of voting rights, same message of be consistent. His phrase now that's been popularized, getting good trouble. All of these things that now that somebody has died, it always happens, right? We start to see their quotes rise up, and we get a second fresh look at the body of their work. That's all going to happen. In fact, I would prophetically say maybe that a lot of the things that are now named, some of them at least, that are now named for Confederate generals, we're going to see some things renamed after John Lewis. As a matter of fact, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, there's been a huge effort to rename that bridge, and I would not be surprised at all if that bridge was renamed John Lewis Bridge. But the point is, you can be great when you're consistent like that. When people look back and say, this guy didn't compromise. Yeah, he had a basic message, but he was true to it, and he stuck to it. Same message of justice, the same message of equality, the same message of rights for all people. Look at that over the body of their work, and you have respect for them.
So if someone is inspired by the words and actions of John Lewis, where would you tell them to go look for the next step?
Their block, their school, their job. There's a biblical passage that says that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. There's work to do. It always amazes me that someone's like, things are fixed. I'm like, what? Or there's nothing for me to do. There's no way for me to help. There's so much work to do. It's just a matter of marrying the opportunity with your skill set. If I was a graphic designer, you know what I would be doing consistently? I'd use that skill to constantly put out memes about social media. If I were, although I'm a musician, I'm musical. If I were really a musician, I'd be writing songs right now that awaken people to what's going on in society. There's work to do. It's just a matter of finding it. And it's not far. You don't have to look far. Look within your locus of control.
And everyone has a skill. I always say that.
Yeah.
You know, neither one of us are superheroes. You know what I mean? We're just regular guys trying to do good in our community. And that's exactly who John Lewis was. He wasn't
absolutely
a superhero. Martin Luther King wasn't a superhero. They were regular guys.
They were human, very much so.
So if someone wants to get in touch with you, Kyle, how can they do so? Do you have like any social media handles or anything?
Yeah, do I? They can find me on all major platforms. It's either Kyle Boyer most of the time or Kyle J Boyer. So Facebook/Kyle J, Facebook.com/Kyle J Boyer. Instagram, my handle's Kyle J Boyer. Twitter, I think, is the one that's Kyle Boyer. I guess shameless plug, August, I've got a book coming out. Yeah, I'm pretty excited. Second book. It's my first book. It's targeted towards preachers, so it's not, if you're not a preacher, it might not be as appealing. But
well, hold it up to the camera so that people can see it. Hold your book up so we can see it. What's it called?
Reflections for the Call, devotional for young preachers. It's been out since January 2018, I think.
I had no idea. What's the next one about?
The next one will be about prophetic leadership in America. So about folk like John Lewis, although he's not a focus, but
I'm sure there'll be a second edition.
He will be thought about. Yeah, man. Thanks so much, Kyle, for allowing me to come in.
No, I really appreciate your time, Kyle. I know you're very busy, but thank you for coming on, and I'm sure I will see you soon. I want to thank Reverend Kyle Boyer for taking the time out of his very busy schedule to speak with me today. Ray, we're coming to the end of the show. What do you have anything that going on that you want to talk to the folks about?
Right now, I am continuing to make my way through the wire, as I mentioned previously. Janet she has learned to like it. So it kind of, for her, it started slow. She needs more explosions. But let's see, we're almost through season 1. Very, very terrific stuff. That's what I'm just trying to go backwards at this point, reflect and catch up. How about you, Kyle? What's next on the agenda?
I don't know. I've actually been a little too busy to watch anything recently. I've actually been talking with your mom on the phone, as I told you about. It's not weird. Uh, and unfortunately, there's actually an eviction crisis on the horizon that I've just started doing research on. And so I've been working to try and figure out what are the resources for people. Well, actually, so I did catch up on one thing. Because I thought we were going to be talking about Metal Gear Solid today, because that's what we were originally planning to talk about. I have been playing some Metal Gear Solid 5 for the PlayStation 4. Great game. It's like a masterpiece.
It's not Revengeance, right? We're not talking about Revengeance.
No. It was the last one made by Hideo Kojima. So it's the real deal. It's the one with Kiefer Sutherland, and like every level ends with credits. It like tells you 100 times that the game was made by Hideo Kojima, directed by Hideo Kojima.
Yeah, you know what you're paying for.
Well, no, because they fired him. We'll talk about all that stuff when we talk about Metal Gear Solid. But I guess that's it for our show today. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. We do this all for you. This show's been made possible by electricity and brought to you by
Light.
So that's it. Have fun. Be safe. And until next week.
Keep geek.
Never give up. Never give in. Stand up. Speak up. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to do something, to say something, and not be quiet.